So let's bow in, everybody. I'm a little bit excited about this particular talk this evening because many years ago, I actually visited India in the early 1980s. The occasion was that Trungpa Rinpoche, Chigen Trungpa Rinpoche, had decided that he wanted to take his students to meet the Karmapa in India, and he asked me to go over in advance and plan out the trip, pick hotels and do an itinerary of a tour all around India, starting in Delhi and getting all the way down into the south at the very tip and then coming back, which I did. And one of the places that I went that was probably the most impressive was the one we're talking about tonight, Varanasi, outside of Delhi in the north. An ancient, ancient city. Sometimes people say it's the oldest city in the world. It's certainly one of them, at least 3,000 years old. And I'm just going to show you some pictures and tell you a little bit about what happened to me. I hired a guide. This is what you do. And to take me down and show me the Ghats. What the Ghats are terraces that come down to the edge of the river, and they extend for, I don't know, 10 miles. And there are lots of them. And they start north, a little bit north of Varanasi, and then they go south. And on these Ghats, let me just show you a few pictures. They're not adequate, these pictures, but they're all I could find on the internet. Hold on a second. Where are we? Okay. How do I do this? How do I share these pictures, Michael?
If you share the screen, does it come up?
Yeah, how do I share? I've forgotten how I share the screen.
The green thing at the bottom, the green icon at the bottom is a share, and it should allow you to share whatever's on your screen.
That's right. Hold on a second. Back to the meeting. There we go. This is what I wanted. Thanks. Just, I think. Yeah. Okay, so this will be inadequate, but there it is. And can you see this?
Yes.
This is the river with one shot of the Ghats. Now, when I went out to the Ghats, what happened was that I hired a guide, and he took me down in the pre-dawn. It was still dark, through narrow, narrow little streets. They were so narrow, and they were lined on each side by beggars, wall to wall, shoulder to shoulder, for a period of a long ways. And you walk, my guide took me down between them. You walk down this path between the beggars on both sides, and they've all got bowls and hands out. And my guide gave me a huge bag of paisa pieces. Each piece is worth about 1/10 of a cent. And you hand them out to the beggars as you go down to the water. And then when you get to the water, it's completely packed. I mean, doesn't show all the people who were there. But there are these Ghats, these are the Ghats you can see, but they're completely packed with people all the way up the Ghats, each waiting their turn to get down to the water. There must be, my guide took me down to the edge of the water and I hired a punt, a little rowboat. And we got in and he took me out on the water. And we viewed the Ghats and all these thousands of people, thousands, from this little boat. I remember asking my guide, I said, is this an extraordinary day that there are so many people? He said, oh no, this is an ordinary day. I said, how many such days as this are there And he said, oh, 300. And there must have been 10 or 20,000 people on these terraces waiting their chance to get into the water. And in the water and on the terraces, they were doing everything you can imagine, from yoga to cooking to eating. And in the water, they're brushing their teeth, they're bathing with soap, they're defecating, they're pissing, every damn thing you can think of. It must be thousands and thousands of people, as far as the eye could see. And I asked him, I said, yeah, is this an extraordinary day? Oh, yes. And how many such days are there in the year? And he says, 300. So this is just, and here's another one. You see, this was completely packed with people, thousands. And in these windows, there were cloths hanging out, because a woman would go in her sari and bathe with the sari on in the water, and then come back out and climb up into these windows through the building and undress and hang the sari out the window to dry in the air. So that there were maybe dozens and dozens of saris hanging out these windows. And here's another picture of another spot on the river. You can imagine this ghat completely packed with people, and these saris hanging out the windows at about 6 in the morning. This is more like it. And even this doesn't do justice to the crowds. And this is every day. If you're a Hindu, the holiest thing you can do while you're alive is to go bathe at Varanasi in the Ganges. Because Ganges, you see, is the river that springs from Shiva's vow. Shiva, there's the triumvirate of gods. Shiva's the destroyer, Brahma's the sustainer, and Brahma's the creator, and Vishnu's the sustainer. And the Ganges springs from Shiva's vow. He lives on Mount Kailash, up in the Himalayas. And the river springs from his vow, is the holy river, so it's very holy to go and bathe in the Ganges. And thousands and thousands of people do. These are all spots, but it just doesn't convey the crowds as far as you could see. I asked him, I said, is it an unusually holy day that there are so many people? And he said, oh, yes. And I said, how many are there? And he said, 300. So if you ever want to go to Varanasi, you have to go hire a guide and go to the Ganges. Okay. See if I can get back to the meeting.
There should be a red button that says stop share.
I'm looking for it. Ah, there it is. Got it. Okay. So this chapter is called A Day at the Ghats. These are the Ghats. The Ghats are these terraces. And they extend for miles and miles. Now, at the northernmost Ghat is what they call the Burning Ghat. And that's where you see the holiest thing you can do, if you're a Hindu, is when you die, you have arranged for your corpse to be taken to the Burning Ghat, the northernmost Ghat on the Ganges, and burned. And then the ashes scattered in the Ganges. So all these people bathing on the terraces, what's coming down the river is full of ashes from the burning Ghats and every other damn thing you can think of. It's really amazing. Okay. So, Mingyur Rinpoche. And what he's doing is he's trying to cut loose from his privileged, protected identity as a Rinpoche who lives very, very privileged. And he goes to Varanasi and he's hanging out. He goes down to the Ghats. On his third day in Varanasi, he walked 5 miles to the Ghats. That's probably the same journey I made down to the Ghats with my guide. Glasses, hold on. He did walking meditation along the river, noticing everything. Eventually, he included his thoughts and emotions in his mind. He says, I opened my mind and let all the experiences flow through like clouds of different shapes and sizes moving across the sky. It must have been a very powerful experience for him, coming down from this protected life as a high lama to suddenly Varanasi and the Ghats and all the poor Hindus. He describes his visit a few years earlier with a retinue of monks and about 15 or 20 students. They'd gone out in a boat, arranged for them, and placed flowers into the river, as well as candles floating on palm leaves. He talks about how pilgrims come from a great distance to bathe and purify their souls and be liberated from the cycle of samsara, because that's what happens when you bathe in the Ganges. Those who die in Varanasi are considered blessed, and the guest houses cater specifically to devout Hindus who come to Varanasi to die and be burned at the edge of the river, just above the Ghats. Their ashes scattered in the water or carried in on wooden pyres. The smell of incense and charred flesh hangs in the air, and boy, does it. Wow. I mean, that water. And the river is really wide at that point, but boy, is it chock-a-block with everything you can think of. We returned to our hotel and sat on long tables in a lush garden, and so did I, where turbaned waiters served bowls of fresh fruits, currants, croissants, and lattes. Now he reflects that memory feels as though it belonged to a different lifetime. I did the same thing. This is the classic thing you do. Then he remembers his beloved teacher, a beloved teacher of his, Nyoshul Ken Rinpoche. Among his principal teachers, only he had lived on the streets as a sadhu, Nyoshul Ken Rinpoche. To be a sadhu means to be a penniless beggar, and Nyoshul Ken Rinpoche had done that. Ken, the word Ken, signifies, is Tibetan for knower. Khenpo means the one who knows. So Nyoshul Ken signifies an advanced practitioner. He was also a scholar of traditional texts. He was very special, as Mingyur Rinpoche knew from his father being Organ Tulku Rinpoche, the father of not only Mingyur, but of Tsoknyi Rinpoche, Chukyinima Rinpoche, and one other who wasn't a teacher. He didn't meet Ken Rinpoche until he was 17 years old in 1991, although he'd grown up hearing the story of how Rinpoche decided to become a beggar. Studying with him happened later. Ken Rinpoche, Khenpo, his teacher, had lived on the streets many years before Mingyur's training with him began, although he'd grown up hearing the story, Mingyur had, of how Ken Rinpoche decided to become a beggar. Sometime in the late 1960s, both the 16th Karmapa, the revered head of the Kamakagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism, and Ken Rinpoche had joined other high-ranking lamas and monastery officials at the conference in Delhi to discuss the fate of Tibet and the exile community. The Karmapa looked at Ken Rinpoche with great affection and said teasingly, "You are a Khenpo. You should not engage in politics." Story about how the Tulku took him to a 5-star hotel in Calcutta and disappeared. This is what happened to him. Mingyur Rinpoche, he was taken to a 5-star hotel by a Khenpo, and then he disappeared, leaving him with the bill, which had to be worked off by washing dishes. One thing led to another, and eventually he reunited with the Karmapa Rumtek. There he decided to take advantage of having no job, no money, no responsibilities. He made the decision to wander, and this is Khenpo. He did this for 3 years. This is not Khenpo This is Nyoshoken, alternating between monasteries and living as a sadhu in the streets. Remember, a sadhu is a wandering beggar, holy. Everything about Nyoshoken inspired him, the graceful way he walked, consistently maintaining his awareness, how he taught that he lived as a beggar. He had died 12 years ago, and he missed him more than ever. He wished he had asked him questions about how he had lived on the streets. He cut away from the river so that he could amble through the narrow lanes that led to the top of the ghats. And I've already described those lanes. He bought cloth for sadhu clothes, Mingyur did, and placed them in his backpack. He observes that while he, like King Menander, might have boldly claimed, "I am not my robes," now it became evident that part of his identity lived in 6 by 9 feet of maroon cotton. He wondered if Khenpo Rinpoche had changed into sadhu clothes, Khenpo Nyosho, or kept his Tibetan robes. He wondered if he had worn sandals or gone barefoot. He describes the scene, Mingyur Rinpoche. He found a tea shop in the shade and ordered sweet masala chai and sat watching. It was too hot for many tourists, but the monkeys, as usual, were out looking for handouts, and I saw those monkeys. They were everywhere, all over all the buildings, begging. And you'll see them too if you go there. A few sadhus and naked ash-smeared Shaivites, that are worshippers of Shiva, moved slowly in the broiling heat, and it is broiling. He enjoyed the quiet moment. In the Tibetan tradition, we pay attention to 3 aspects of retreat: outer, inner, and secret. Outer refers to the physical environment. Some atmospheres are more conducive than others to disrupting our repetitive habits of mind and supporting an exploration of the inner mindscape. Still, we should not be completely dependent upon these outer circumstances, even though they are helpful for beginners. And for all of you, I recommend solitary retreat, that you start out with a short one, 2-3 days max, and consult with me or someone experienced in this, and go into solitary retreat. Solitude is so powerful for your practice. He says what's necessary is a willingness to know the depths of your own mind. His understanding had been that the Varanasi train station was as perfectly suited for meditation as a shrine room or a flower garden. After all, he reasoned, he was not a beginner, and perception defines the context, not the other way around. Still, the Gaya station, and then the train ride, and then sitting with the homeless, had pressed on his mental composure. Now he, Mingyur Rinpoche, needed to bring his body places that soothed his mind. Since boyhood, he had been steeped in the precepts that guide behavior and speech, and he knew that he would have to make distinctions between breaking cultural conventions and breaking true vows. For instance, as a monk, he'd given up eating meat, but for this retreat, he would accept whatever he was given, whenever it was given. The same was true for all the rules of monastic behavior. They're kind of out the window. Survival is foremost. He tells the story of a German student attached to his expensive mountain bike, that Tulku Ujin told him that getting rid of it would not help break his attachment. It might even strengthen it, Tulku Ujin told this German student. One has to work with the mind of attachment, liberate the attachment, and then you can choose to keep the bike or not. This is the same for all of the things we're attached to, including meat. Do not push away, do not invite. Work from the middle, and slowly you will transform attachment into an open mind that allows you to make appropriate choices. The inner retreat is being alone in the world, and this would present different options than he had ever known, and that to some degree his monastic vows had been safeguarded by his Buddhist robes. Exchanging these Buddhist robes for the new yogi clothes meant giving up the protection that his robes had provided. At this point, he still felt too vulnerable to do that, but this is where he's heading. He wants to be alone in the world, a wandering beggar. Secret retreat refers to intention. He said he had taken vows his entire life to help liberate sentient beings from self-created suffering and to introduce them to their own true wisdom. The intention for this retreat, the secret retreat, did not waver from the intention to set out for any other retreat or practice that he had ever done. He'd been surprised when some Westerners asked him to explain the benefit of wandering retreat. It appeared somewhat selfish to them. They felt there are so many ways to help others make the world a better place, and that personal retreat is selfish. Often they try so hard to make the world better, their intentions are admirable, yet they seek to change everything but themselves, these Westerners would say. Until we transform ourselves, he says, we are like mobs of angry people screaming for peace. Now more than ever, I place my faith in Gandhi's approach, Mingyur says. Be the change you wish to see in the world. Nothing is more essential for the 21st century and beyond than personal transformation. It is our only hope. Transforming ourselves is transforming the world. This is why he was on retreat, to more fully develop his capacities, to introduce others to knowing their own wisdom, their own capacities for a peaceful life, to discover his aloneness, his own spirituality, so that he could communicate the same to others. He thought about a man he knew who had visited the Ghats on his first visit from America to India. That could have been me. He had gone to India as a college student, yes, on a study abroad program, and was taken into the Ganges in a small boat. He was shocked and appalled to see people bathing, even washing their mouths. All this is true, brushing their teeth, just a short distance from where bodies were being burned and their ashes scattered into the river, and people urinating and defecating. A human torso floated by, and I saw them in the water. And this person was overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. Until that point, he had assumed that the spiritual path was orderly, that it was clean, pleasant, and quiet, and he associated it with immaculate Zen monasteries and silent meditations, and it sure wasn't that at the Ganges. That day, he learned that there is no spiritual reality separate from daily life, that in order to know anything of value about himself and about living in the world, he would have to travel deep inside himself. On his way back to the station, he watched horses in a field of lush grass. This is Mingyur again, straining their necks to reach out between the boards of the pasture fence in order to eat the grass on the other side, just like us, continuously longing for what we don't have. The grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Continuous agitation reveals a low level of the satisfaction that never entirely ceases, except for a few peak moments here and there. We're restless. With this scent, we have something better close by, but out of reach. We remain convinced that the perfect temperature or perfect partner or job is just around the corner or over the fence. We imagine that our compulsions will weaken. We will outgrow our immature cravings. Some new friendship or job will rescue us from crippling self-hatred, or loneliness, or from feeling that we're always making mistakes. These fantasies for change, for the good, persist even for decades. And where do we do it now? While often few of them or none ever come to fruition. This orientation that you're in happiness and away from dissatisfaction points to an innate quality. Even behavior that is misguided or destructive, such as stealing money or inappropriate sexual relations or using addictive substances is motivated by the wish for happiness. The universal constancy of this orientation toward happiness is a reflection of our basic goodness. However misguided the expression for happiness might be, the yearning draws on an inherent desire for care, comfort, and the sense of well-being, and indicates that the wish for happiness arises from the core of our being. It could not arise from a belief in goodness or an imposition of religious dogma or of social values. Beliefs and values are concepts and therefore subject to change and whim. This orientation to be kind to ourselves and what we call basic goodness is with us just as awareness is, recognized or not, is here. You can't stop it. We never live without it. The more we recognize awareness, the more access we have to our own loving qualities. Loving kindness and compassion are the natural expression of awareness because genuine expressions of an open heart transcend conceptual ideas and attitudes and exist beyond duality, beyond words and logic. This is loving kindness and compassion. They exist beyond words and logic. The more we rest within the boundless state of awareness, the more our love and compassion become boundless. Being alone and caused a surprisingly harsh break, making Mingyur fearful and uptight in ways he had not experienced for decades. At such times, anything that seems reliable may vanish. What do? Can we seize the unbidden opportunity to explore this new mental territory of non-defined spaciousness that is actually always there? We scramble as fast as we can back to the circumscribed limits of the mental or physical components of our known world. The Gaia station provided a heightened chance to slip through the gap. This is the first station that he went to when he left his monastery. To slip through the gap that was created by disruption and to experience the unconditioned self as coming back into this pure, simple awareness. To explore reality once the grasping mind had been demolished by shock and before it put itself back together. I could not take advantage of this gap, he says. I could not allow myself to be in that formless space and instead struggled to regain my sense of self, which meant at that moment, by reconstructing my idea of Mingyur Rinpoche as rapidly as I could. These breaks in the mental loop cannot be wheeled into being recognized. However, we can train ourselves to become more sensitized to their presence, especially with regard to common occurrences. You sneeze and there's a gap and you come present. In many societies, responses to sneezes offer protection against the invasion of an evil spirit. We traditionally say, God bless you. Where it's believed that sneezing can eject the soul from the body and saying bless you helps the soul return to its internal place. A sneeze is identified as an interruption of habitual mind, a gap. For a split second, the mind stream is cut. The muttering mind is silenced. It cannot coexist with a sneeze. This is the real blessing. To be suddenly startled or see a wild animal or trip and fall or learn of life-threatening diagnosis of a disease, or see a natural phenomena or an exquisite work of art, or anything that makes our hearts skip a beat, that stops one's mind, all function in the same way. And yet we often miss it. It goes without looking at the mind. We cannot recognize its clear, empty nature at that moment. Still, it's important to know that we all share this ordinary moment of naked mind, we can learn to recognize these moments. As we begin to examine these moments and gain some acceptance of their common occurrence, we might be amazed to discover how frequently moments in daily life stop our minds, and we're just here. This is the real meaning of Tamakishepa, ordinary mind, pointing out mind, stopping mind, becoming completely present and awake. Then we can take advantage of these natural events to access remarkable information about the true nature of who we are. This. With these flashes of naked mind, many deaths occur, the death of ego. For an instant, the me, the ego, that defines our identity and directs our functioning temporarily dies because we've come completely present. But we do not die into nothingness, we die into deathless awareness. Yawning, stretching to the limit, to stop after jogging or some other exertions, all these can have this effect. Once we acquire some familiarity with physical events that stop the mind, we might explore similar mental states that arise in more ambiguous situations, such as feeling elated on leaving the office on a Friday afternoon after an intense work week. Many people feel that the annihilation of the conceptual mind leads to nothingness. In reality, it reveals the luminous emptiness of mind that is always with us and therefore accompanies our journey at the time of physical death. This is what is meant by the teacher's function of pointing out the nature of mind, pointing out the luminous, inherent, natural quality of mind. We learn by becoming aware of dying before we die. That awareness is that dying is rebirth. That's what happens every time you die. Recognizing luminous emptiness is recognition of death, the death of the ego. Becoming familiar now with emptiness diminishes our fear of losing our bodies, because when we lose our bodies, it is all that continues, that luminous emptiness. This is what happens when we die. What is this based on? On the fact that it has never been constructed. The luminous emptiness, the awareness. All conditioned things sooner or later disappear. Unconditioned reality can only come with experience. Yet when we start paying attention to our everyday minds, the constructed version of ourselves falls apart, but we don't die, and we might want to investigate what is left. A big question that exists in the West is whether or not something of us continues when we physically die. If we can connect with any aspect of reality that is beyond the normal limits of the thinking mind, then we must ask ourselves where this reality comes from and how it came into existence. If we can prove to ourselves through investigation that it has no beginning, then perhaps we can accept that it has no ending. This is the reality of pure awareness. We do not need dramatic, life-shattering experiences of luminosity to pursue this question. We can start with sneezes or yawns, or meditation exercises, or noticing the details of breathing in and out. Anything that automatically contains a gap. So you breathe in, gap. You breathe out, gap. And here we are. But to get anywhere in our investigations, we have to be willing to relax our fixed minds and let go of our ideas of what is real. Where are we in time? Got plenty. Letting go itself is an example of dying. This is what dying really means. It's just letting go of self. But recognition of this dying is what allows us to inhabit the continuous cycle of dying and being reborn with ease. In addition to many deaths that come with glimpses of emptiness, sleep offers a deeper experience of dying before we die. And this can be understood as a kind of medium death, sleep again, bringing us a step closer to the final big death that occurs when our bodies give out. Again, the only real benefit comes with recognition, not with the physical event alone. So we have to be able to recognize that sleep quality of the death of self. Training the mind to stay aware of the entire process of falling asleep is not easy. But even making some conceptual adjustments to how we relate to this daily occurrence shifts our relationship with death. For example, Tibetans have a custom of turning over their cup before going to sleep, signifying not just the end of the day, but the end of one's life. In the morning, we first think, I'm alive, I can see, I can hear, I can feel. Then we turn the cup right side up. My new life begins and I'm ready to receive. In the morning, the mind is very fresh, and just one moment of appreciation for being alive can orient our whole day and remind us of the continual cycle of living and dying. Mingyur says, after my long hot walk, I re-entered the station, the train station, grateful to be out of the sun and to have purchased the sadhu shawls. But I was also a little apprehensive because the station hostel imposed a rule that no more than 3 consecutive nights, and this would be my last. Back in the dorm room, I lay down on a cot, both tired and restless. As always, I was prepared to engage in sleep meditation, the last mind-training exercise of each day. I was ready to die to the day and eager to see what rebirth tomorrow might bring. And that's the end of this chapter. Michael, should we have a Q&A or should we go straight into the next chapter?
We could pause a moment in the gap between that chapter and the next and see if there are any questions that come up.
He's describing sleep as a precursor, a pre-experience to death, and that what death is the big sleep, Philip Marlowe. But it's still sleep. So when you go to sleep at night, this is like dying. Your senses all shut off. Your mind shuts down. You go into dream. That chapter is worth reading and rereading. I recommend it. It's very dense, very profound. That's Judy.
Okay.
Yeah,
Kristen?
I'm under Valerie's name at John's house. I did have a quick question about, thank you, John, that was beautiful, beautiful teaching. I understand about the 3 different types of retreat, that the inner, the outer and the inner, and then the secret. I understand, I feel like I understand the outer, but the inner and the secret, and the secret is like intention. So I wonder if anybody could elaborate on like what the inner intention, what that really means, or how that's different than the secret. How are the inner and the secret intention retreats different?
What do you think, Michael?
I'm going to look up exactly what he says and then I'll respond. Right.
I mean, outer retreat's very clear, right? You go,
Yes.
you sequester yourself.
And some outer circumstances lend themselves better to disrupting your habitual patterns. And
Best
when,
thing, best thing
yeah.
is solitude. And the best thing is solitude in an environment where you don't have any triggers, any reminders of your ordinary state of mind, you know? So you go into something very simple, environment very simple, where you've just got a bed, you know, like a cot, something to keep you warm, some food, and a meditation cushion. Things that don't trigger your habitual responses. That's outer retreat. And it's very powerful.
Would inner retreat be like practicing lojong, kind of like alongside of the external situation that comes up, like just the body kind of our practice, or and it says here in the book, inner retreat refers to the physical body. Um, and yeah, I'm just trying to understand that.
Inner retreat means you're giving up companionship of any kind, including your own. You're giving up habitual responses to the world. When you go into this very simple environment of the outer retreat, then your habitual responses become much more pronounced and easy to give up. I would say that's my understanding.
Yeah, and I'd say with secret retreat, where he says it refers to intention, often the word that's used there is aspiration, but it has to do with the whole view of why we're practicing and what we're intending to do. In particular, he talks about that in relation to Bodhisattva vow. I've taken vows my entire life to help liberate sentient beings from self-created suffering. And that vows are very powerful when they're put into practice like that, because it really has to do with letting go of ego altogether for the benefit of all sentient beings. And without that, it's very easy for practice to go awry into some kind of spiritual materialism. I'm doing this to make a better me, as opposed to a stronger me, a whatever me, as opposed to really letting go of ego. I mean, on a relative level, that's fine, but it's from the point of view of practice and the best practice, that's the aspiration or the intention that is even most powerful in terms of guiding the practice.
Retreat is so powerful, and I recommend it for everybody here with caution. Before you go into your first retreat or any retreat, you should consult with someone experienced in retreat, with Michael or me or someone else, someone who can guide you. Because it is really strong. Michael?
Yes, I'd say the same thing. But if we could go ahead into the next chapter. People, unless there's another question or comment. All right, so the next chapter is entitled "The Sleep and Dreams," and it really kind of picks up where we just were with talking about sleeping and being similar to death and dying. In a way, this chapter kind of harkens back to some of what's already been presented here about the bardos, in particular the chapter titled "What Will You Do in the Bardo?" So I just wanted to read a little piece of that from that chapter as a kind of a reminder of that topic altogether. Remember, bardo is a word that means gap or interval, in between state. And as he says in the chapter, what will you do in the bardo, that it's most often thought of as what happens in the period of time between dying and period after death, and eventually leading to rebirth. But that really, he says, bardo can be understood to mean this very moment, The nowness of this moment is the continual suspension or pause in between our transitory experiences, both temporal and spatial, such as the tiny halt that exists between this breath and the next, or the arising and fading of this thought and the next. However minuscule this interval might be, it always exists, and it's always bracketed. Everything in the whole world system exists in between something else. From this perspective, the exclusive reference of intermediate to the state between death and rebirth emerges as the prototype for transitions that occur within this life cycle. So there's quite a bit actually in this. It's a short chapter with quite a bit in it, and it ties together with what he has been talking about throughout this book, about impermanence and emptiness. But he begins with, again, the process of simply falling asleep. And again, just to refer back to the Bardo teachings, there are 6 traditional Bardos that are taught. The Bardo of this life, which is where we are right now. The Bardo of meditation, where hopefully we were at some point today or in the recent past. And Bardo of this life, Bardo of meditation. We have the Bardo of
Dream.
Well, they're coming to that, yes. Then you have the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of Dharmata, Bardo of dream in this life, but in after-death experience, the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of Dharmata, and the Bardo of becoming, where a person seeks some kind of rebirth. And what he's really going to do in this chapter is show how these Bardos manifest in our life all the time, but in particular around sleeping, dreaming, and then waking up in the morning, as being analogous to the Bardo of dying, the Bardo of Dharmata, and the Bardo of becoming. So he says, first he talks about how he does sleep meditation that he ended the previous chapter with. And he begins the sleep meditation with the head-to-toe body scan, which is easy enough to do. We just begin settling into our bodies and just notice how we're feeling progressively, perhaps from foot to head or head to toe, whatever, that there's an entire scan of the body just to see how one is feeling. As he says, this brings awareness into the body, and he began to notice the tension dissolving just as he became aware of what he was feeling. And then he placed his mind on the dissolution of the senses as they begin to fade, because this is what happens when we fall asleep. We withdraw inward, and no longer are the senses, as they say, facing outward, but facing inward. He says we often generally tend to think of sleep as a necessary biological break from life, and we take this dissolution of the senses for granted and usually pay no attention to what's happening. But with sleep meditation, he is paying attention. He's trying to actually remain aware as he falls asleep, as the senses dissolve. Because ordinarily we just black out, as he says, drugged or drunk. Yet this, as he says, as he ended the previous chapter, this dissolution, this coming apart, this letting go, this dissolving practice parallels the physical dying. So in a sense, just as when we're in the Bardo of dying, when we are falling asleep, we have the same process going on of a progressive letting go into sleep. And he says that if we can actually pay attention to this, if we can actually see this process occurring, then we realize that although we get into bed with a solid sense of self, this begins to dissolve. Our consciousness diminishes. As he says, the bonds that hold the conventional mind in place become unglued. And the physical shutting down of the body's foundational grid absorbs into this process of letting go, dissolving, fading away. And this automatically releases us into universes far beyond the limits of our waking lives. So again, it's a process of really letting go. And with that, we fall into dreams. The content of dreams, he says, is nothing other than the projections of our own mind, but without the controls or manipulations that we impose during the day. So there's a letting go of who we think we are, how we think we are, what we conceive of ourselves as being, that dissolves into sleep. And then there's a completely different sense of being that arises in the dream state. And that what arises in the dream state, as he says, is without the controls or manipulations that we impose during the day. Coming back to this notion of the dissolution of the senses, he says that's actually quite difficult for almost everyone to really be able to track very far. That we fall asleep because partway through the process we just submit to sleep, as he says, and just as the sense organs do. And that to actually maintain recognition of awareness throughout the process takes a lot of practice and an extraordinarily sensitive mind. And then he tells a story about the 16th Karmapa, who was just an amazing presence, for people who had the chance to meet him, but just like a blazing torch of clarity and sanity. In any case, he tells a story about the 16th Karmapa asking to meet with a tutor or a teacher of the Dalai Lama, and he said that he could maintain awareness throughout the entire day, and he could track the dissolutions of consciousness, but not awareness. Awareness remains even as the sense consciousnesses dissolve. He could maintain the awareness through the dissolutions right up to almost falling asleep. And then once he was asleep, he would again recognize his awareness. He was aware. He would experience lucid dreaming. But again, there were just a few moments each night just before slipping into sleep when he lost his recognition of awareness. So the revered guest, as he says, listened awestruck. He'd never encountered such a stunning report of continuous recognition and immediately made prostrations. And then they discussed texts that talked about this possibility of remaining awake and aware through the entire process of falling asleep. And he says, as inspiring as this story was, he had never gotten anywhere close to that degree of steady recognition. And during his 3-year retreat, that his efforts to practice sleep meditation proved difficult. Although we could try this tonight. And it's interesting to try. I have tried this a few times, and just as he says, I don't get too far before it's lights out. But you actually can track. Actually, what he says is he was more successful when he was in sitting meditation practice, but very tired. And they called an early morning, like a 2 a.m. meeting, and he kept falling asleep. And he tried to just keep awake by doing, as he says, all the tricks for staying awake, rolling his eyes up, digging nails into his thighs. But he kept nodding off. And then he thought, okay, let's try to practice sleep meditation. And he said, at first it felt a bit like I was falling. Then my mind quieted down, and I was able to rest in meditative awareness for about almost 5 minutes before losing this state and falling asleep. So he was able to watch the withdrawal of the senses inward, and the dissolving of our daily sense of self into something else. And he says when he woke up, he felt very rested, very light, and his mind was in meditation, peaceful, relaxed, open with clarity. And he says that was the first time. And he says, for me, the best time to practice sleep meditation is still during a meditation session when he gets very sleepy and allow himself to fall asleep, or during those indescribably long, boring ceremonies that they sometimes had. So again, I think, first of all, we do, for most of us, think of sleep as just going to sleep and aren't paying attention to this process of dissolving, this process of letting go, that is part of the falling asleep process. But we actually can, if we just relax and watch, can at least see some of this, I think. I can't say I've had any great success with it either, but just knowing that it's a possibility in and of itself is, I think, quite startling. Again, because as he says, we usually think of falling asleep like being drugged or drunk or just, and yet it's possible to maintain awareness through that process. So he's in the train station dormitory for his last night there before he has to go back out into the train station without being able to go back to the dormitory. And he talks about a dream that he had that, as he says, brought no solace. And what he describes is a dream where he's on the mountain paths near his home in Newbury, back in Nepal. And as he's walking on this path that's quite narrow and quite high up, with boulders up above, suddenly the boulders came down and filled the air, and the boulders started tumbling down and crushing him. And he woke up startled. Again, I think we've all had that experience of waking up from a nightmare dream. And realized he was in the dormitory with all the people around him sleeping, and said, and as he said, I had not woken up and become lucid in my dream of being crushed by boulders as I had been trained to do. I'd reacted as if I were a helpless victim. Because the practice of lucid dreaming is one of the yogas that Naropa practiced, and is practiced in the 3-year retreat. And there are plenty of books written about lucid dreaming, the idea of just being aware, I am dreaming, as opposed to just going along with being swept away with whatever is occurring in a dream. And as he says, that's not what happened. He did not realize it was a dream. As he says, he'd been a hapless victim in the dream. And he said that he was trying to convince himself that this dream was a representation of his irrational fears and the struggles that he was having going on this retreat, and not some kind of omen or didn't portend anything about his journey. And then he goes into some discussion about dream meditation, lucid dreaming, not so much from the point of view that how to do it, but more what we could come to understand, or what we might come to experience by looking at our dreams. It's often taught, the dream example is often given as an example of how we create a world in our minds, because in a dream, clearly everything that we see, hear, maybe feel, smell, taste, I think those senses are less common in dreams, but everything we see and hear is clearly a creation of mind. There is no outer world. It's a mind-created world. And it's said that this is exactly analogous to what the world is that we experience during the day, that we live in, essentially we live in a kind of a dream, or actually you could call it a simulation that's created by mind. And that the appearance of an outer world is ultimately illusory, and that's really what he's going to get at, the illusory nature of this sense that develops of self and other, of self and outer world. He says, when we practice dream meditation, we train to wake up within the dream and know that we are dreaming. This is exactly what we try to do during the day, by the way. Try to wake up and realize, if not dreaming, at least that we're distracted, that we're not present. He says we often speak of enlightenment in terms of waking up, which means to directly see things as they are. Daytime or nighttime, the message is the same, wake up. So, again, if we're able to do this, if we're able to wake up in the dream and realize this is a dream, then we can do things in the dream to avoid the danger. We could, as he says, we could duck out of the way of the falling boulders, we could fly, we could fall, and we know that nothing's really going to happen to us. Because we know, essentially because whatever we experience in the dream is purely a projection of mind, that we don't exist in a dream with a real physical body. We exist with a dream body. And this is quite similar to what's experienced for those of us who were with us in the previous book that we discussed, Luminous Emptiness. This is analogous to the Bardo of Dharmata, where we experience the different visions of the wrathful and peaceful deities. And the idea is always to remember, again and again, we're asked to remember in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, Book of Liberation Through Hearing, or asked again and again to recognize that whatever we experience is the projection of our mind, that and not to be afraid, but to actually be able to be present with our experience just as it is. And this is, again, what we're asked to do in meditation practice, and as best we can in the bardo of this life. So again, it's essentially daytime or nighttime. The message is the same: wake up. He goes on to say, we know that the dream reality is without limits and inhibitions. But even when we acknowledge that our dream body arises from our own minds, we insist that our dreams are illusory, not real. And yet there is a quality in a dream of it seeming real. And really that's what he's going to be talking about, is this seeming or illusory sense of realness that we experience in a dream, and that this is the same nature of reality that we experience in waking life as well. He says dreams can reveal useful psychological information that can't always be accessed by our daytime minds. But here what he's talking about is when we use dreams to investigate reality, we're not trying to interpret or understand their meaning or look for signs or symbols. Although it can be, as he says, it can be useful, can provide useful psychological information. Rather, when we're using dreams to investigate reality, we work with the direct experience that dreaming offers us to challenge our assumptions and expand our perceptions. He says that a rigid mind demands that everything conform to its expectations. And this is not dream mind. This is ego mind, conditioned mind that he's talking about here. For this reason, when we dream about things that we know aren't real in our waking life, like that we've drowned or that someone, we dream about dead loved ones or flying, that we immediately conclude that the dream is not real because it doesn't correspond to our experience in waking life. The dream reality is dismissed, and our static and confused perceptions about remain the touchstone of reality. Yet this view shifts when we initiate our exploration of no self, and the recognition of impermanence begins to dislodge our attachments to fixation. So what he's saying is that looking at what we can think is real in dream and what we think is real in daily life, and look at the experience in dreaming, that we come to understand something of the illusory nature of what we experience in waking life. That we can begin to, with the recognition of impermanence, we begin to dislodge our attachments to fixation, that things are a certain way, that things are a definite way. And he says with that, then we can take a fresh look at dreams, where they present the very opposite of a closed, rigid mind. Dream images tend to be insubstantial, filmy, translucent, mirage-like, and out of our control, but not outside of our minds. Not outside of our minds. He says we may be stunned by our dreams and try to shake ourselves awake from nightmares or repress taboo information that surfaces. Yet our dreams are us, for these images can only arise from our perceptions and our projections. He says nothing appears too stable in dreams. More often, everything is fleeting or shifting. In daytime, we presume an individuated and controlling self, whereas in dreams, that same self liquefies into every conceivable and inconceivable type of phenomena. So again, he's talking about looking at the sense of self that we have in a dream, and look at the nature of mind that we experience in a dream, and look at the nature of projection and what we project in a dream. And that this can loosen our fixation in daily life. Nothing appears too stable in dreams. More often, everything is fleeting or shifting. Again, in daytime, we presume an individuated and a controlling self, whereas in dreams, the same self liquefies into every conceivable and inconceivable type of phenomena. So that bardo of dreaming is again analogous to the bardo of becoming. The bardo of dharmata that we experience after death. And again, the main point is to wake up and recognize mind and recognize the projections of mind. He then says the transitional period between dreaming and waking up is analogous to the bardo of becoming. That we may wake up feeling scared from the dream, disoriented as he did from his dream of being crushed by the boulders. And then instead of staying with those feelings in order to find out more about what they offer us, we generally scramble to reconstitute ourselves in terms of yesterday's reality. As we come back to trying to orient ourselves to, rather than looking at the fleeting quality of the dream images and the fleeting quality, the illusory quality of reality that we experience in a dream, we try to anchor ourselves back in fixed mind. Which is, again, like the bardo of becoming, looking for, in the bardo where we look for another birth. He says, once again, the anxiety of dislocation pushes us away from what's transitory, unknown, and insubstantial, and toward familiar images that appear as solid and lasting. We wish to return to what best fits our expectations. So again, this is analogous to the bardo of becoming, looking for, where in the after-death experience, the consciousness looks for a new body to inhabit, looks again for that kind of solidity. And he says, thank goodness that dream was not real. My partner did not leave me. My child is not in the burning house. I am not drowning. I am once again who I am, who I really am. He says, we run away from the fear and seek comfort in what is familiar. But this is the critical point. Yet since what we are running away from comes from our own minds, we are running away from ourselves. And as a strategy for happiness, this never works. So then he, again, has this dialogue with himself that he shares with us, that he was not crushed by the boulders. That does not make me solid. I am alive, and I am dying day after day. I'm still asking my father's question. Are you Mingyur Rinpoche? Are you the same or different from the Mingyur Rinpoche in the dream? And he says, I can touch my arms, my face. If I reach out to touch the dream, I will feel nothing. The boulders didn't hurt me. If the ceiling overhead were to fall down, I might be crushed. I might bleed. Is this the same or different, Mingyur Rinpoche? Nagasana said that he only exists as a label, a denotation, a conventional usage, a name, that he is not as blood, but he could still bleed. Who then was bleeding? So again, all of it, contemplation of these experiences really loosens the fixed way in which we, the conditioned way in which we typically view ourselves and construct a sense of self. He says dreams are like every other aspect of our existence. They happen, we experience them, but they're not real. Their appearance is deceptive, and we easily recognize this non-real aspect of our dreams. And again, this is why dreams are so valuable for understanding the emptiness aspect of reality. Everything is infused with emptiness, and that includes our bodies, our blood, the boulders, our names, and our dreams. During the daytime, phenomena appear to be denser. This makes daytime a tougher schoolroom for learning about emptiness, but it's much easier to recognize emptiness in dreams. And again, it's what he's asking us to recognize is the transitory, impermanent, illusory nature of what we experience. This is in no way different from Lojong slogans that we've studied in the past, regard all dharmas as dreams. It again is talking about being able to see things as process, as change, as in flux, rather than as fixed, solid, and unchanging. Again, to say that life is a dream acknowledges the ceaseless, boundless quality of emptiness in ourselves and our loved ones, our iPhones, airplanes, food, anger, lust, wealth, and everything. Phenomena have no inherent existence. Everything arises from emptiness and never separates from emptiness. Yet it's a lot easier to perceive this with nighttime dreams than to acknowledge our own emptiness by looking in the mirror. So this is really, what he's saying is that our ordinary way of thinking is to say daytime experience is real, dreams are unreal, and to separate the two as if there's no connection. But when we actually look at our experience, realize that it's not that simple, that in fact, that the impermanent, transitory, constantly changing nature of things is characteristic of both dream life and waking life. So he says he woke knowing that he'd spent his last night in the Varanasi station. He wondered where he would be that night, where he would sleep. The uncertainty was a little frightening. but also a little thrilling. And with that, he launches into the next chapter, learning to swim. This is again a chapter, by the way, in which there's some very key instruction about how we might practice, because, well, I think that'll become clear. Because it begins with his looking at his inner experience, but then, going out into the world and working with, the world around him. So he says he's leaving the dormitory hostel for the last time. He returned to the stone floor of the train station. He became agitated, knowing that he couldn't return to the dormitory, and decided that he didn't want to stay in the town of Varanasi, as it was too popular a site for pilgrims and tourists. He says he wasn't really ready to sleep in the area designated for the homeless, but more to the point, he'd longed to live with no plans and without checking his watch all the time. But now, with his open-ended horizon felt baffling, he had to make decisions. And he thought about his last 3 days, these 3 nights in the dormitory and the train station, and tried to take a hard look at his resistance, his vulnerability, and his aversion toward the people around him. So again, first there's a looking inward. What am I experiencing? What is my mind? So that's again the first step. It's in a sense similar to the previous chapters where he talks about first just working with his breathing to settle himself. But in this case, he's looking at his experience in the moment and trying to look at what it is that what is the nature of his resistance, vulnerability, and sense of aversion. He says he didn't want to return to confusion. He said the station wasn't his home, but he didn't feel as much intense alienation as he had before. He was beginning to let down his guard a little, at least enough to edge toward the people on the floor around him with an attitude of curiosity and kindness. So again, the first thing is just getting in touch with where he's at, what he's feeling, and now he's opening up to the world around him, as he says, with an attitude of curiosity and kindness. And he's looking at his experience, and what he realizes is that every move that he made, everything that he's done, from a blink to a breath to staying in the dormitory, that all of it can stem from a wish for change, and that this wish for change was always oriented toward happiness, and that judging someone for looking unclean or smelling badly or whatever was really a neurotic way to seek happiness. It's neurotic because it provides a toehold to climb up from and allows you to temporarily enjoy the illusion that you're better than someone else. But it's never just they're bad, it's also therefore I'm good. But even still, even with this longing, and even though there was a neurotic quality to it, he still says that there was still in that a desire to return to something positive, some sort of happiness. As he says, there was still a longing to connect to his own true self. And to others, that even with the distortions and projections of his aversion, that still there was something inside him trying to be free by pushing the negative, something that was trying to basically come back to some kind of sense of goodness. He says on the train, his body had been rigid and closed, making the waves of aversion, again, ocean and waves, big and strong, but he didn't know how to play in such strong surf. He couldn't completely know in his body and mind that these people experienced their own longing for happiness until he could acknowledge his own. So again, it's his being able to connect with his desire for happiness is the seed for recognizing compassion and directing compassion outward. He talks again about his life in Newbury and watching the seasons change, and how his grandfather pointed out that not only that everything was impermanent, but it was many of the things that brought him joy, the flowers, the berries on the bushes, that all of this emerged out of impermanence and emptiness, that everything arises from impermanence. And so, as he says, if we can see that the seeds for regeneration exist within change, then we can become more comfortable with dying every day, with dying before we die, with being delighted with the sandcastles as they wash away. So again, it's becoming comfortable with the process of dissolution and reassembling now, which is what we talked about in the last chapter with sleep, dream, and then waking up. Dissolution, coming back together, and just seeing the flow of these transitions without being fixed at any one point. He says this is not an overnight project. Old habits die hard, but they do die. So again, on the train, he'd continuously return to seeing this journey was about change and transformation, and that the waves of regeneration were growing. So he began again with himself, may I have happiness, may I be free. And he contemplated this, he says, until the meaning slid down his throat like a thick syrup, spreading through his body. May I have happiness, may I be free. I repeated this until the meaning of the words thoroughly soaked into my being, until I softened it and my heart opened. Not as fully as I had known at other times, but so much further than it had in previous days that he started to cry with appreciation. After about 30 minutes, he felt he had stabilized enough in relation to himself, connecting with his own desire to feel positive and happy and a sense of goodness, that he could then extend that to others. And he said, unlike repeating the reminders on the train, I wouldn't look upon a mass of others, but he chose one particular person to begin with. And in this case, he chose the wife of the man who he had spoken to in the train station, and began thinking in much the same way, or repeating to himself in much the same way, may she be happy, may she be free. And he thought about her life, her hardships, may she have food, may she have shelter, may her children be happy. And he says he repeated this until her sweetness, her lovable qualities, her worthiness to be loved and respected, that he felt that just as much as he had about himself, that we shared the same wisdom, the same fundamental luminous emptiness. Beyond dualities, we lived in the mutual, boundless environment of unconditional love and awareness. He says compassion that arises with empathy acknowledges that ignorance causes suffering, not the suffering of poverty and homelessness, but the suffering of misperception, of taking phenomena to be real in ways that are not true. Remember what he said before, that waking up means seeing things as they really are. And as he says this, as he connects more and more with this feeling of love and connection and compassion, he feels, this woman is as precious as I am, but there are no signs she knows how to free her mind from misperception. And therein is the bodhisattva intention, this awareness that even though and in her heart, in the essence of her mind, the true nature of mind, she is the same as him, that she doesn't know how to free herself from the misperceptions that bring suffering. And with this, evokes tremendous compassion. And he continues with this, may she be free, may she be happy. He said, I stayed with this woman's image until I knew that I loved her unconditionally. I loved her husband, her children. I wished for them the same happiness from suffering as for the children in my own family. And then with that, he then expands his heart to all the people in the station, the people on the floor, the people rushing by, the vendors who'd sold the rice and dal and tea. He says he expanded his love to include all those on the train from Gaia who he had found repulsive or had struggled with, had felt aversion toward and withdrawn from before. Those who had stepped on him, fallen on him, and I knew without doubt that they too wanted happiness, just as he did. This is the great equality, that all beings wish to be happy, all beings wish to be free of suffering. And as he says, he realizes this is the same for everyone in the entire world. So by beginning with himself, may I be free, may I be happy, may I be free, expanding to another person, expanding further, expanding further. This is great Mahayana practice that he's teaching us here. And with that he rested, quiet and calm. I entertained no delusion that this respite would bring an end to his difficulties, but it lessened my anxieties about having no place to go. Because he's made friends with the world is not, doesn't appear to be an enemy anymore. So he is gradually more and more becoming at home with wherever he is. Images of himself as a beginning swimmer kept emerging. Again, continue to think about the ocean and waves that we talked about in the previous chapter. The strong currents, especially the vulnerability that swelled from being alone, had carried me away from my own internal protection. He says, I kept my head above water, but he had struggled. And he says he imagines that he imagined a good swimmer feeling fearless in the water. No, not just fearless, that it was not good enough to only negate fear. A good swimmer would welcome enough water as a challenge. In this dirtiest train station in all of India, I would learn how to swim. Yes, I could do this. This is very similar again to what he's talked about before, about adding wood to the fire. So again, here we can, a tremendous example of compassion practice and the importance of compassion practice for being able to be in the world with awareness, compassion. Because so long as there's some kind of struggle or battle with the world, it's difficult, impossible to wake up. This is exactly what Shantideva says when he says all the suffering in the world comes from wishing happiness only for oneself. All the joy in the world comes from wishing happiness for others. So he said he'd left home and followed through with this plan to go to Varanasi. Now he has no more plans, but he could direct his future. He says, I had many options. He could return to Bodh Gaya or to Kathmandu, maybe even head north to his monastery in Tibet. But he just says he's not attracted to that kind of shelter, despite the difficulties that he's experienced in the last few days. He says, I want to take rebirth as a wandering yogi. So here again is his intention, just as we talked about before. His intention to take rebirth as a wandering yogi, to wake up in order to be fully awake, so that he could then benefit other beings, which he's done, among other things, by sharing his experiences in this book with us. I'm making this, and he says, I'm making this decision voluntarily, consciously. The chance to do this is a gift from previous practices, which I thought that was a great line, a gift from previous practices. I think many of us, all of us, have some sense of the gift of practice and what the gift of practice has been to us. But his practice is so rich and deep. And as he says, even though he'd had challenges, or as he says, he'd kept his head above water, but he had struggled. And this is because of the gift of practice. These are my karmic seeds, and I will not squander them. The joy and excitement about this retreat grew out of his practice. My confidence and courage of the fruition of my studies, awareness and insight practices, and sleep and dream meditations, emptiness practices, compassion practices, everything. All the things that he shared with us, as he shared all of this. And he said, I'm not giving up. The embarrassment is still there. Remember, the embarrassment was one of the difficulties he had about letting go of his role as Mingyur Rinpoche and living as a wandering a beggar with no apparent abode. But he says, I can still direct my future, not to continue without these unbidden companions, but to continue with them. Unchangeable awareness in the midst of turbulence. I am directing this body to continue with the embarrassment and the shock of being alone, sun and clouds together, naked and clothed, learning to swim in the water. So with that, I'll conclude this chapter, and in our reading next week, we'll see what he decides to do next.
So you're all invited to come to the discussion tomorrow after evening meditation.
So we should conclude by dedicating the merit. Generated through our practice and study for the benefit of all beings. Make the gift of our practice for the benefit of all beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the radiant wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, everyone.
Sleep meditation tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, John.
And we're about
Thank
to
you.
dissolve too.
Thanks so much, Michael and
Thanks all.
John.
Thanks,
And John.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Good night.
Good
Thank you.
everybody.
Good
Hey,
night.
John,